Hi, can everyone hear me okay, or can the moderators hear me? Okay, thank you, Derek. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing again, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining my session today. I'll start with a quick introduction of myself. My name is Tom Tretter. I'm a managing director with SphereMC Consulting. I actually have a mix of consulting and industry experience, but over 20 years. I focused most of my career on business transformation projects, but also doing managed services and PeopleSoft ERP support across multiple industries. I will say I have a fairly significant amount of experience in healthcare, but again, I've worked kind of across industries. In terms of the session today, here's the agenda. I'm going to start off with a quick overview of PeopleSoft Enterprise Services Automation, the ESA modules overview. Many of you, there's a set of core modules that many companies have implemented, but there are a set of modules that we're going to cover today that we want to really get a little bit broader exposure to. So I'm going to probably ignore some of the more common use cases and talk about some of the use cases that may be new and applicable to really companies across industries. Other agenda points, program management. So that's one of the core ESA modules that I'm going to talk about. One of the less used modules in PeopleSoft Financials. Same thing with resource management. I'll give an overview of that module as well. Then I'm going to cover a few use cases, again, that are applicable across industries that we're starting to see more companies move to. So the first use case is tracking resource assignments, and that could be internal employees or external contractors. The second use case is tracking project time and labor management. And then the third, really showing integration around capital projects and asset tracking, which many of you are probably doing today. I'm just going to talk about a few integration points that aren't as common. And then we'll stop for questions and answers at the end. Okay, I have a few introductory slides for SphereMC. This is really just a plug for some of our other sessions that we're doing with the Quest and Vision conference. So we have about 13 presentations total. So welcome everyone to join those throughout today and the next day or two. This is just an overview of SphereMC and some of the different services that we focus on. Really, all things related to PeopleSoft across financials, HCM, supply chain, campus solutions. So we implement and do enhancement projects for pretty much all modules in PeopleSoft across suites. We do application support and managed services. We have a heavy focus on training, both people tools and all the technology components within PeopleSoft. We do hosting on OCI. We do quite a bit with PeopleSoft Test Framework and test automation. That's actually one of our managed services. We do managed services around PUM updates. And then we also do EPM Cloud and Hyperion and business intelligence work as well. This slide just gives you an overview of our offices across the coast and how we've really expanded over the last really 15 or 16 years. Our latest office that we've opened is on the East Coast in Pittsburgh. This slide just talks about, we're actually very proud. Gartner has recognized some of our Oracle Cloud infrastructure offerings. This slide talks to the Gartner recognition. This next slide really talks about our managed services offering. And actually, it looks like I'm not getting the animations here, but we offer managed services across a whole suite of services. So both upgrades, testing, functional support, as well as technical support, system administration. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the slides for the session. I wanted to start off with a slide that really gives you an overview around the PeopleSoft ESA suite. So again, Enterprise Services Automation. You'll also hear an acronym PSA for Professional Services Automation. The core modules that we're talking about related to this suite is project costing, actually grants management and proposal management. They're technically separate modules and licensed separately by Oracle, but there's a lot of very similar functionality between the two. So essentially, grants and proposal management is all about tracking projects and awards before they are won. So it enables you to track projects that are maybe submitted that you're competing for. Same thing with grants. You can think of a grant as a project. So that's where those two modules really come into play, and very similar or mirrored functionality across the two. There are some slight differences though. The resource management module. So again, resource management, we'll talk more about that in the upcoming slides. Program management, and then there's contracts, AR, and billing. And typically those modules are used for billing for services, or in some cases it could be billing departments within an organization as well. So when we talk about ESA, those are the set of core modules that we're mostly talking about. I've also highlighted some of the other modules across HCM and financials and supply chain that also tie in closely to the ESA suite. So we have core HR, time and labor, and payroll. And then in financials, GL, time and expenses, AP, e-procurement and services procurement, and purchasing. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this slide is a really good overview of when we talk about program and project management and the ESA solution. This slide kind of depicts the end-to-end process. So if we start from the top left corner, where project requirements are fed in, that could be project requests. It could be opportunities for projects that, in the traditional sense, if you're a services firm, you're competing for business. you know, bidding on projects. That it's also where grants come in. Again, you know, research organizations, universities, public sector organizations that are bidding for grants. You can think of all of those as you know, a similar process. And again, that's prior to the project initiating. Those are the requirements being fed in. So the chevrons at the top: identifying opportunities, qualifying opportunities, building proposals, reviewing proposals, and generating awards. Generating awards could also be thought of as you know, creating projects as well. So that's kind of the initial project creation process. Once the projects are approved, you'll see you flow down in the bottom right. The projects get set up. If you are billing for services, you'd be setting up contracts as well and defining terms for revenue. I'm not going to go into that too much today. Again, that's kind of your core professional services firm usage. What I'm focusing on today is more cross-industry use of these modules. So it's going to be more around tracking costs, budgets, and running projects that are internal to an organization. Once projects are initiated, you're typically managing resources. So resources are getting assigned to that project. It could be an IT project. It could be some type of operational project where you might have field resources getting assigned. So those are all some of the upfront steps in initiating a project. Once it's initiated, then you move on to execution. So from an execution standpoint, you're typically having, you know, your project resources submitting time, submitting expenses. You're doing procurement and paying invoices. All of those resources are essentially hitting your projects at this point. And you're managing, you know, the project, the resources, the costs, the activities throughout the life cycle of the project, and tracking really your budgeted cost, your planned cost to the actuals that are flowing in to projects. Once you get to the end of the life cycle and you finish your projects, again, you could be building an asset, you could be you know, a tangible asset, it could be an intangible asset like an IT project. You're typically going to close those projects. You may actually be creating assets at that point and actually depreciating and you know, incurring depreciation expenses again over time once those projects close out. And then the life cycle starts all over again. So you're doing lessons learned and essentially managing your portfolio of projects. Again, kind of back to the beginning, where your projects are getting approved and flowing in to the portfolio. So again, this is a really good slide kind of depicting the end-to-end process. So moving on to the next slide. I mentioned this earlier, but so ESA has use cases that span industries. Really, the key point is that they can be applied to any industry that runs projects internally. There's definitely a good applicability for these modules. Some of the common use cases, again, and this is more the traditional, is managing grants and services projects. From an internal perspective, you could also be tracking and creating assets. So that's CIP, or construction in progress. You could be requesting and managing project requests to help help manage your project portfolios. Again, prioritizing projects, tracking how projects roll up to each other in the portfolio. You're tracking labor costs, and you can be tracking labor costs related to capital projects, or you can also use projects to track some of your operational activities, some of your support activities. Project costing does not have to be used just for capital. And we've actually seen many organizations use it for those operational activities, just to get really a better handle on expenses and time and managing resources that go into those operational activities. Last but not least, tracking resource forecast and utilization. And then there's many other uses for them as well. I listed on the right, again, some of the common industries where the ESA modules are used, but again, they can be used by any industry. Okay, next slide talks about delivered PeopleSoft integration. So really, project costing, you can think of it as your detailed ledger for projects. It's similar to GL in that you have a lot of these sub-modules or sub-ledgers feeding it, but project costing is actually a much more detailed ledger than GL. You're getting much more detailed entries in project costing than you do in GL. If you're a project-oriented organization, it's really the heart or the lifeblood of your business. So what I've done here is this depicts many of the integration points across both financials and HR. Again, some of the modules highlighted in red, those are some of those core ESA modules. I mentioned proposal management, resource management, program management. Then we highlight some of the other financial modules. Okay, I'm going to drill in a little bit more to program management with this slide. Wanted to give you an overview. We're not going to go into too detailed the functionality. I do highlight a few areas within program management, but at a high level, what program management does is it manages project requests, versions of projects, and approval workflow. So if you're submitting a request for a project and budget approval, you can actually track the approval process with using the program management module. You use program management for project planning, so creating individual projects, scope of projects, and deliverables. You can organize the projects into programs, creating what's called a program tree. So if you have certain programs that have projects rolling up to it, the trees actually allow you to roll up your metrics, which could include project costs, project budget, looking at variances, looking at the health of projects. So you can look at not just at a project level, but a program level as to what parts of your project portfolio are at risk, either from a financial perspective, a risk perspective, maybe a schedule perspective as well. You can use program management to create project budgets, schedule activities and assign resources, track program and project risk, change requests, issues. You can create and update services forecasts. So if you want to maintain a forecast of what, let's say, your labor costs are going to be, not just upfront from your budget, but ongoing. We all know, project forecasts change over time as you get through and move through the project. So forecasts allow you to basically, forecast out where your budgets may need to change, and so you can actually get a better view of where you're at currently, not just tracking back to your original budget, but where your forecast is currently. And I mentioned this earlier, but you can assess program and project health. Okay, again, I'll show you a few pieces of functionality in a little bit more detail. This is a screenshot of the project request functionality within program management. So within a project costing business unit, you can enter requests for projects. So you would put in a description, you'd have a requester enter this estimated start and end dates. Oh, sorry about that. The desired finish dates. If you have a project manager assigned, you can actually assign that project manager during the request. And you can also track costs and benefits and net benefits. So that's essentially your business case for the project. This next set of screens, that last one showed you really a summary view. If I move across the top where the tabs are, you'll see where this screenshot shows a detail of what the costs look like. So you can actually estimate costs out by month and year, by different types of costs. So it really depends on how granular you want to get with your cost budgets. But you can get as granular or roll it up as high as you want at this level. Then from a benefit cost summary, cost and benefit standpoint, you can see you can also calculate your net benefit. So that's essentially your ROI. And again, if you want to estimate this out over a certain time span, that's really something you determine when you're setting up the project or the project request. If I go through some of the top tabs, this is actually just good to take away. You can do attachments to the project request. You can estimate maintenance costs related to the project. So if there's some type of support or maintenance related to it, you can actually track those costs. Dependencies, milestones, and then we covered the summary, cost and benefits. From a project health perspective, this screen just shows you some of the setup options and what dimensions of project health that you can track. So you can track the project overall. You can track schedule. So, timing wise, are you on track or off track? Your budgets, your resources, issues, and risks. And you can actually assign weights to these different dimensions of project health, and it indicates some thresholds around warnings for those project health indicators as well. Okay, so that's it for the program management, resource management. This slide gives you an overview of some of the functions within it. You establish project resources, again, both internal and external contractors. You can create employees and contract resources, track their profiles and resumes, track competencies and qualifications, and also track work history and assignments. You will assign resources to projects. You'll manage those assignments. So if resources are maybe moved from one project to another, you can actually have resources with multiple assignments. So that changes over time. So those can be fluid from day to day or week to week. You can capture service order resource requests and fulfill those. So again, if you need new resources for a project, you can resource requests allow you to enter those and identify potential candidates that would be a good fit for it. Again, this would be really good for any type of internal IT project or operational projects that you may have, or capital projects. Resource management allows you to search for assignments for resources. So if you have resource coordinators, or what are frequently called in PeopleSoft pool managers. So those are just usually supervisors or managers that individual resources roll up to. Their responsibility is to keep resources chargeable or deployed on projects. The searching for assignments is a function of that role. And last but not least, you can use some of the data in resource management to determine scheduling, training, and hiring needs for the organization. Okay, the next slide. So this talks about some of the integrations in resource management. I'm not going to go through all of these. We kind of looked at some of the overall ESA module integrations, but the gist of it, PeopleSoft Resource Management really works across both HR and financials. So the resources that we're talking about ideally come in from PeopleSoft HR. So that assumes that you're using HR to set up the employees, and if you want to track contractors or contingent labor, you would also need to track those resources in HR as well. So you don't need to enter redundant data within RM. You can actually use the data that's already entered within HR. It integrates closely with program management. So as we talked about earlier, program management is really for tracking the projects and the demand for resources. So that demand gets fulfilled with the resource management module. And then, of course, project costing is used as well. So a lot of that project data is actually set up and managed in project costing. There's also the proposal management module, which we talked about earlier, and the services procurement module within financials. So if you have resource requests, you can actually fulfill those within resource management if there aren't any internal resources to fulfill. So that allows you to go externally and bring in or hire contingent labor to fill the needs. Okay, this slide talks about resource profiles. So you can actually see, your individual resources are tracked. This data comes over from HR. So you have employee IDs, supervisors, the departments that they get assigned to, job codes. They have employee statuses. Let's see, roles that get assigned. They'll actually, you can track resumes for resources, competencies and interests, education, licenses and certificates, and work experience, among other profile data. So there's a lot going on the profile, but that gives you a good overview of it. Some of the analytics that you can get with resource management, and this is a pretty basic analytic that's delivered, but you can get a lot more detailed with it. But basically, this is analytic comes off the Resource Management Work Center. It actually shows you for a specific manager and resource pool how many resources exist, and then how many of those resources are tracking competencies, qualifications, resumes, specialties. So this kind of is more of a compliance view, but gives you an idea of what what resources are, have finished updating their profiles in the system. Again, this is kind of more of a compliance report. Okay, the next set of slides actually goes through a use case that we actually worked on with one of our clients. And this was basically a use case around tracking resource assignments using the resource management module. So basically, you can see at the very top here, there are the steps. So you have assigning resources to a project or a role, notifying resources, viewing schedules of resources, checking in and out of those roles, and exception reporting. I'm just going to focus on a few of the steps because we don't have time in this session to go through all of them. But core functionality in resource management is assigning resources to roles and projects. So you can see this is one of the key screens where you can do that. So you have assignment IDs, you have project roles associated with those assignments, and you have projects associated with those assignments. And then you can identify start dates and end dates for the resources that are assigned. So this is an example of the online entry screen. We've also developed import Excel to CI import processes, so you can actually import those assignments as well in bulk. Going through the screens is good for kind of ad hoc changes, but if you're trying to really plan out projects and assignments for teams related to those projects, it's easier to do that through an Excel import. So this is just an example of those steps. This next slide allows you to view schedules. So this is actually a fluid view that we developed that allows you to look at a calendar view of resources. So essentially, you can see resource assignments that are not assigned to a resource. There's actually color coding in this fluid calendar view. So if you see gray boxes here, it indicates that the assignment has not been filled by a resource. The green boxes in this scenario indicate that the assignment was actually filled by a resource. And then the blue boxes indicate resources that are on call or backup resources. So again, this view was developed for one of our clients based on some specific needs that they had for tracking their project assignments and resources. And it can be tailored based on specific business requirements. But really nice visual view of your pool and your list of projects. Okay, this next slide actually talks about some exception reporting that's available within resource management. So this is just an example of showing resources that are over allocated. So basically, this would be any resource that has more than 8 hours assigned during a given day, or they're assigned to multiple projects and the sum of those projects exceeds 8 hours. So hence the over allocated resources. So everyone in this, this is actually a pivot grid. Everyone in this pivot grid, you can see generally has more than 8 hours, or their sum of hours is greater than 8. You can see we're also using a threshold here for any resource that has beyond 12 hours in a day. So, very high utilization those are actually highlighted in this report. So a good example of pivot grids and where they can come in. Okay, so that ends the resource assignment scenario. The next scenario I wanted to cover, or use case, is around capital and operating project tracking. So this process flow here really gives you the high-level view of the steps. So first, you're maintaining projects, activities, teams, and the trees, how the projects roll up. You're managing users. Again, those users could be resources. Those users could be administrators of the projects. You're processing time for the resources on the project. So those resources are typically submitting time reports, and you're approving time reports. And then last but not least, you're doing reporting and analytics. So if we drill into this a little further, again, I'm not going to go through all the steps, but this first slide shows you generally how projects could be set up using project costing. You're entering the project. You can set up templates in project costing to help create the projects and default and values. We talked about it earlier, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that slide. We talked about project trees earlier. This gives you a depiction of how trees can be built. You can decide how many levels are in the tree and how your projects roll up. So you may have a master program with multiple programs rolling up to it at your level 2. So in this example, you have program A and program B on the right, and then you have individual projects rolling up to those programs. You also maintain labor rates and project costing. So again, we talked about labor, not just tracking labor effort in hours, but also tracking labor cost. That's a big part of managing projects. So labor rates typically need to get established in project costing using rate sets and rates. So this is a bit of administration that's required, usually by finance or possibly HR. The next slide talks about submitting time reports. Time reports can be submitted using time and labor within HR, but another piece of functionality exists within expenses. If you don't want to go through the full time and labor process, which I know many organizations may not want to do, because either one, they're not using time and labor, or two, there is a little bit more overhead if you're tracking internal projects within time and labor. So one way to avoid that and any issues that you might have with going through HR is you can actually use expenses time tracking functionality. So basically you can submit time reports using expense time entry. And we have a number of clients using this functionality for their internal projects. So you can see there's a time entry fluid tile for entering time, and this depicts a screenshot of that fluid time entry. You also approve time reports using expenses. So typically your employees are reporting up to a supervisor or a project manager. You're going to have to design that time approval workflow process and how the time gets routed internally. Again, it's using the full AWE framework, so you have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you set up that business process for time approvals. But this just shows you an example of that. Last but not least, project reporting and analytics. So related to that example that I just walked through of setting up projects and managing labor, time and labor costs, this is just an example of a report that you could set up. There's actually, I would say dozens of different views and metrics that you can create in PeopleSoft for tracking projects and labor time and labor costs. This is just an example. The top chart or table actually shows you total hours being expended for this given project by month. It's showing other hours, which had a specific meaning for this client. If you are billing for those hours, you could track revenue, but again, in most cases, unless you're a services firm or tracking a grant, you're just going to be tracking the costs. And then you can also see how many total employees are actually charging that program or project. So again, depending on what level of the tree and how you're rolling up these analytics, you can look at that by your overall program or your whole portfolio, or you can actually drill down to a specific project or even an activity within the project. You can look at hours trends by month. So at the bottom, you can actually see where billable hours are actually fluctuating by month. Again, that may not be billable. That could just be hours charged or worked on internal projects by month. You could actually develop views, so you're looking at capital versus operating. So you could actually see, or a split. So you could see, for instance, how many hours are going towards capital projects versus operating. You can even look at percentages of capital versus operating. Those types of metrics, what we've seen with a few clients who have done this, it's really good for forecasting resource needs into the future. Maybe if you have, high number of capital hours and that persists over time, you may actually want to look at hiring more employees for specific skill sets on those projects. So there's really a lot of insights into your workforce and into your business that you can get, and that's really one of the key takeaways that you should have from this presentation is, how do I use these PeopleSoft modules to develop new insights into my business? Okay, this is one of the final slides, and I know I just have a minute or two left, but wanted to call out some additional integration that's available for creating assets. Typically, what you see is what's in the middle here with purchasing, AP, project costing, asset management, and GL. I've added over to the right HR, time and labor payroll, and financials, time and expenses. So these are also kind of key parts of the ESA solution. Mentioned these previously, but these modules feed project costing, and you can actually use that data to build your assets. So just wanted to point those out. I think that concludes my time. So thanks everyone very much for joining. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to look at, what use cases and requirements might you have at your organization, for using the modules. We also do demonstrations. So if there are specific use cases you're looking for, we'd be happy to, do a demo for you. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon and a great conference. Bye, everyone.